Alright, so this is to Alright, so suggested workflow to get through this final project. There's a lot of steps to it, and you've learned a lot of things from the textbook that's made you familiar with how ArcGIS works. Now we're going to try to take that knowledge and those skills and apply it to a project of your own. So step one, before you get started, is to determine what the purpose of your system will be and develop a query. You need to do this first because it's going to then dictate what kind of information you gather together. It's going to control everything you do for this project. I have kind of looped this into step number 2, so go ahead and talk about step number 2 here. Once you determine what the purpose of your project will be and what kind of questions or queries you're going to try to run, then you're going to create and gather the data. You need to make sure that it is all in one folder. For the midterm project, some people submitted a project file, like an ArcMap file, but they didn't submit any of the attached data, so it just came up blank. So make sure that everything is in one folder, and then you will zip that folder. You can have subfolders within it if you want, and you'll see an example of that here in a second. But as far as the data, it's going to include your field collected data, so what you physically go out in the field and take measurements on, CAD drawings, spreadsheets for non-spatial data, any documents, photos, and also downloads from public sources. And also, I think it would be helpful if you started your metadata list at this point to help track it as you go. So I have an example of the metadata list here, and before I started doing anything with the metadata, I went ahead and wrote out a few query examples. Now, you only technically have to do one, but I want to give some examples of what the purpose of my project is. So recently for our boundary surveying class, we did a small boundary on like a 1.5 acre tract. So I'm going to use the data from that to develop my system, and some of the things I want to ask it might be in regards to the monuments that are out there. So either property corners that we found or control that we set. I can ask things about those in two ways. So, for example, what boundaries are the monuments tied to, or what boundaries are the control points within. I also set up my information about my monuments as far as their type. So is it a control point or a property corner? What is it made of? Pipes, nails, rebars, that type of thing. Another example that you could do is to determine properties based on their sizes. So keeping these things in mind, there's several more we could do based on the data that we got for this project, but these were just a few that I experimented with. But based on these types of things, that's going to help me properly organize my data and make sure that I get it shaped the right way and things like that. So that's step one. What's the purpose of my project? Step 2 from the list was to gather the data. And so I want to give you an example of what I mean by a list of metadata. It does not have to be anything special or fancy, just pretty basic. So some of the items that we'll see in my project that I'm going to demonstrate are boundaries. And so I just have some information about those. The boundaries are in the NAD 83 2011 Indiana West coordinate system, and they were generated in CAD from field collected data and record documents. And so then I talk about my documents. All of those were obtained for the Knox County, Indiana Recorder's Office. I won't go through these in detail, but you can see some more examples of the metadata, which is the data about my data that's going to show up in my project. And this is all you really need to do. Just tell me where it came from and the specific information about it. If it has a coordinate system, if it doesn't, how you got a coordinate system on it. For example, I have a raster and it was geo-referenced, so it initially didn't have any coordinate system data with it, but I geo-referenced it in ArcMap. So this is step number 1 and 2.